When my hands start shaking at the end of a shift, I know it's not age. I'm 68, but that's not why my hands shake. It's fear. Fear of the bills, of tomorrow, of the call from Orson. Every time his name pops up on the screen, my heart sinks somewhere down, and the only thought that flashes through my mind is, how much this time? My shift at the Eastern Shore packing plant ends at 6 in the evening. 12 hours on my feet, amidst the smell of raw meat and sanitizers. My fingers are swollen and calloused from the cold water. My back aching like someone has hammered nails between my vertebrae. But that's nothing compared to the pain my own son is causing me. I live in an old house on the outskirts of Baltimore, in a neighborhood that was once decent, but now is slowly deteriorating like everything around it. The roof leaks in 3 places, the windows rattle in the slightest breeze, and at night I can hear something scrabbling in the walls. But this is my home, the last thing I have left. Every morning I wake up at 4 o'clock and make myself oatmeal with water. Milk is too expensive. Then an hour on the bus to the factory where I pack chicken breasts, thighs, and offal for the supermarkets. I once dreamed of a different life, of a small flower store, of traveling. But all those dreams crumbled into dust when I ran away from my husband 36 years ago with a 2-year-old son in my arms. Dexter, my ex-husband, was handsome and charming in public. At home, he was a monster. His fists left scars on me that have long since healed, but his words burned wounds in my soul that will never heal. Worthless. Stupid. Ugly. These words still echo in my head, especially when I hear similar intonations in Orson's voice. The day Dexter hit not only me, but took a swing at our young son, I realized we had to run. I packed what little I could carry, took the $180 I'd been hiding under the doormat, and we disappeared in the middle of the night. I changed cities, jobs, names, until I settled in Baltimore, where no one knew our history. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Janitor in the morning, waitress in the evening, cashier on the weekends. Every dime I put aside for Orson's education. Not eating enough, not sleeping enough, denying myself everything so my boy wouldn't need anything. He was bright, with good grades, and I believed he could get out of the poverty I was in. When he was 14, he started to drift away. Ashamed of me, of my job, of our home. I thought it would pass, that it was just adolescence. But as the years went by, the gap between us only grew wider. After college, Orson got a job with a construction company. Nothing great, but steady. That's when Shelby showed up. Tall, slender, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached those eyes. She worked in hospital administration and saw Orson as a stepping stone to a better life. There was something of his father about him, the same physical attractiveness, the same superficial charm, and as I soon learned, the same latent cruelty. The emergencies began. First, Orson's car broke down, and he needed $2,000 for repairs. Then Shelby had health problems and needed surgery, which for some reason insurance wouldn't cover. Then they found the perfect apartment, but they needed a deposit right away, or another buyer would take it. Every time I gave everything I had. I took extra shifts, borrowed from neighbors, pawned the few valuables I had, my mother's wedding ring, the silver earrings I inherited from my grandmother, the pearl necklace my father gave me for my 16th birthday. Gradually, I lost all my friends. Either they got tired of me asking to borrow money, or I stopped talking to them because I was ashamed of my perpetual lack of money. The only one left was my neighbor Ezra, a quiet elderly man who sometimes brought me soup or helped me with minor repairs. He never asked where my money went, but I could see the understanding and sympathy in his eyes. One day I saw Shelby in an expensive boutique, trying on a dress that was the price of my 2 months' salary. The next day, Orson called to borrow money for emergency bills. I gave him everything I had, and a week later, I saw their pictures from a vacation in Mexico on social networking sites. Something broke inside of me, but I kept giving, because I was afraid that if I stopped, I'd lose my last connection with my son. He only called when he needed money, and I told myself it was better than nothing. Last Tuesday, I was coming back from an extra shift. My arms were sore, my eyes were double-visioned with fatigue. I met Doris, a former neighbor who had recently taken a job at the Crystal Swan, one of the most expensive restaurants in Baltimore. Mavis! she exclaimed when she saw me. Did you already know about the wedding? I froze. What wedding? Your Orson and this one of his, Shelby. They booked the Swan for the 15th. The whole upstairs room, can you believe it? It's worth at least $5,000 in rent alone. And they've chosen a menu: lobster, champagne, 7 entrees. The ground is shifting from under my feet. My son is getting married, and I'm hearing about it from a strange woman. You must be so happy for them, Doris continued. They say it's going to be 150 people. Shelby had the invitations gilded on expensive paper. Did you get them yet? No, I said. It must have gotten delayed somewhere. Doris shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Something like pity flashed in her eyes. Well, it'll come, of course, she said uncertainly. Well, I must be off. It was good to see you. I went up to my room and sat in the dark for a long time. Why hadn't Orson told me? Didn't he want to see me at his wedding? Or was it Shelby who thought I would spoil the picture? My hands reached for the phone. 3 rings, and I heard his voice. Cell phone rings. Ma? Is something wrong? There was no concern in his tone, just impatience. Orson, I heard. You're getting married? Pause. Yes, in 2 weeks. We were going to tell you. But we didn't. Pause again. Look, we're all stressed out here with preparations and everything. Shelby's hysterical about the flowers and they're having trouble getting them delivered. I could help, I said quietly. With anything. He sighed. That particular sigh I'd heard 1,000 times. A sigh full of annoyance. Actually, there's something. We're having trouble paying for it. Shelby's parents thought they could put more in, but they're having some kind of business problem. And the restaurant needs payment up front right now, or they'll give the date to someone else. And there it is. The real reason for the call. I gripped the phone tighter. How much? Mom, I'll pay you back, I swear. This is the last time I'm asking. Shelby and I just want everything to be perfect. It's our special day. How much, Orson? 12,000. But that's just the deposit. We'll figure out the rest. 12,000. I had 3,400 in my account, all I'd been able to save for the last 2 years. I'll think of something, I said at last. Thanks, Ma. I knew I could count on you. I gotta go. Shelby's waiting. And he disconnected without asking how I was, without asking about my health or my job. The next day I went to the bank. My house wasn't worth much, but it was enough to get a $15,000 loan secured by real estate. I signed the papers with a trembling hand. If I couldn't make the payments, I'd be on the street. But something inside me said this was my last chance to make things right with my son. If I paid for his wedding, he'd see how much I love him. He'll understand the sacrifices I've made for him. Maybe he'll finally appreciate it. I wired the money the same day. 12,000 for Orson, the rest for the first payments on the loan. But I wanted to do more. I called the Crystal Swan and added a premium lounge decorating package to the order. That's another $3,000. Money I planned to spend on roof repairs. I also arranged directly with the catering company and prepaid for the most expensive alcohol. I paid for a photographer and a videographer. I did all this in secret from Orson, imagining how surprised and touched he'd be when he found out. I never asked for anything in return, but in the back of my mind was the hope that after all this, my son would invite me to the wedding, that I could see him happy on the big day. Orson didn't call after he got the money. I dialed him myself a few days later. Hello, darling, I began as nonchalantly as possible. How are the wedding preparations going? Fine, he mumbled. But things keep going wrong. Shelby's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I'm sure everything will be fine. Have the invitations gone out yet? Long pause. Too long. Orson? Listen, Mom, here's the thing. We've decided to have a wedding just for close friends and Shelby's family. I felt something inside of me snap. But I'm your family, I whispered. I know, it's just... Shelby thinks there's going to be too many people, and her parents made a list and... I understand, I interrupted, even though I didn't understand anything. Of course you do. Thanks for understanding, Mom. You're the best. Listen, I gotta run. I'll call you later, okay? I sat there listening to the dial tone, feeling the last illusions melt away like morning fog in the sunlight. My son didn't want me at his wedding, after everything I'd done for him. but something inside me, some weak but stubborn fire, didn't want to give up. I pulled out of my closet an old dress I'd been saving for special occasions. It had gone out of style about 10 years ago, but it was the only decent outfit I had left. Then I found a small brooch in the dresser drawer, the only piece of jewelry I hadn't pawned yet, and I made a decision. I'm going to this wedding, even without an invitation. After all, I paid for it. The morning of the wedding day was unusually clear for October. I woke up before dawn and sat in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at my tired face, at the wrinkles that ran in deep furrows, at the gray hair I tried to hide with cheap dye. How many years had it been since I dressed up? How many years had I not thought about my appearance, saving every dime for my son? The dress I pulled out of my closet smelled of mothballs and stale life. Dark blue, with a small lace collar. I'd once thought it elegant. Now it looked hopelessly outdated, but it was all I had. I spent almost an hour trying to style my hair and apply makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes and my earthy skin tone. Then I sat on the edge of my bed for another hour, doubting. Do I have the right to show up uninvited? What would I say? How would I explain my presence? But does a mother have to explain why she wants to see her son on his wedding day? I remembered how Orson was little, how he snuggled up to me during thunderstorms, how I read to him at bedtime, how he, 5 years old, seriously promised to marry me when he grew up. Where did that love go? At what point did it turn into cold indifference? At the last minute, I decided to buy a gift. I spent the money I had set aside for the medicine, a mere $120, on a silver picture frame. It wasn't great, but it was all I could afford. I wrapped it in leftover gift paper I'd kept for years, carefully unfolding it each time I used it. I attached a card to the frame with the simple words, "Be happy. Love you, Mom." The Crystal Swan was located in a historic red brick building in the center of town. The cab cost me $40, an unacceptable luxury, but in my outfit, I couldn't afford to take the bus. Standing in front of the restaurant, I suddenly felt out of place and small. There was a livery doorman at the entrance, and elegant guests, women in expensive dresses and men in perfectly tailored suits, bustled past. I clutched my old purse tighter and squared my shoulders. After all, I am the mother of the groom, and I paid for all of this. The doorman gave me an appraising look but let me in without question. Inside, there was live music, a string quartet playing classical tunes. There were flowers everywhere, white lilies and roses, exactly the kind I'd always wanted for my own wedding but never got. The room was decorated with exquisite elegance, crystal, silver, flawless white china. I wondered how many extra shifts I would have to work to pay off the loan for all this splendor. The guests had already gathered, but the ceremony had not yet begun. I cautiously made my way between the groups of people, looking for Orson with my eyes. No one paid any attention to me, except for a few who looked at my old-fashioned dress with puzzled eyes. Finally, I saw him. My son was standing at the window, so handsome in his black suit, with a boutonniere on his lapel. He was laughing at something the tall man next to him was saying. I froze, admiring him from afar, afraid to approach and ruin his mirth. But then I gathered my courage and headed toward him. Orson saw me when I was a few steps away. A smile froze on his face, replaced by a look of shock, and then one of unconcealed horror. He quickly apologized and stepped toward me, blocking my path. "Mom?" His voice was quiet, but it was ringing with steel. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for your wedding," I said, holding out a package. "It's for you and Shelby. A little gift." He didn't take it. His eyes darted around, checking to see if anyone was looking at us. "We talked about this," he said through gritted teeth. "You weren't invited." "I'm your mother, Orson. I thought—" "What?" he interrupted. "That you could just show up here uninvited? Look at you. This place isn't for—" He didn't finish, but I understood. Not for people like me. Not for old women in cheap dresses with calloused hands and the smell of factory disinfection that seemed to be embedded in my skin forever. "I just wanted to see you get married," I said quietly. "Nothing more." "What's going on here?" came a sharp female voice. Shelby. She was coming toward us, radiant in a white dress that must have cost more than my entire closet for the last 20 years. She was followed by a middle-aged man and woman with equally cold stares, apparently her parents. Nothing, dear, Orson said quickly. Mom was just leaving. Mom? Shelby looked at me with undisguised contempt. You weren't invited. It was said so loudly that the nearest guest turned around. I felt myself blush. I know, I just wanted to say congratulations. Orson, Shelby's father put his hand on my son's shoulder. This is an exclusive event. The safety of the guests is a priority. The implication was clear. I was a threat. Like I wasn't the groom's mother, but a random stray who'd wandered into someone else's party. Orson clenched his jaw and looked me straight in the eye. I'm sorry, but you weren't invited, so go away, he said, as if he were talking to an annoying beggar. You're going to ruin the pictures. It was like the world froze. I looked at him, my boy, my own flesh and blood, and I didn't recognize him. There was no love or pity in his eyes, only annoyance and shame. Shame for my own mother. I understand, I said, though my insides were torn with pain. I turned to leave, and then I noticed that one of the guests was filming the scene on his phone. A young man with a trendy beard and a smirk on his face. He didn't even try to hide his amusement. Next to him, several girls were whispering and covering their mouths with their hands, but I could see laughter in their eyes. My probably pathetic figure in the old-fashioned dress, my humiliation, all became entertainment for Shelby's rich friends. A sharp shame pierced me from top to toe. Is this what a mother's love is worth? Public humiliation? Should I call security? I heard Shelby's father's voice on my way out. No need, Orson said. She won't be any trouble. She. Not even my mother. Just she. Like I was an inanimate object, an annoying nuisance that needed to be moved out of the way. I don't remember how I got to the exit. My ears were buzzing and my knees were buckling. The doorman opened the door for me with the same indifferent expression with which he had let me in. To him, I was just another visitor, not worthy of special attention. It was drizzling outside. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the gift I'd never received, and I didn't know where to go. The bus stop was 2 blocks away, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Something inside me, something very fragile and very important, had finally broken. A cab pulled up next to me, and the driver rolled down his window. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked with a touch of sympathy in his voice. I nodded, unable to speak, and got in the back seat. I called out my address in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. The rain intensified, the drops drumming on the roof of the car, blurring the lights of the city outside the window. I stared at them, and gradually my stupor was replaced by something else. Anger. Not furious and blind, but quiet and cold, like the blade of a knife. I remembered everything. Every sleepless night over a sick child, every dream deferred, every meal skipped so he could have everything he needed. I remembered how I sold my mother's wedding ring to pay for his school field trip. How I refused knee surgery because he needed money for a new laptop for school that month. How I skipped doctor's appointments because I couldn't afford health insurance, but always found money for his needs. And this is how he repaid me. Your looks will ruin all the pictures. The pictures of the wedding I'd paid for with the last thing I had a roof over my head. My hand reached for the phone. I dialed the number of the only person who'd really cared about me all these years. Ezra, I said when he answered. I need your help. Ezra Pimlico, my neighbor, former bank clerk, now a retired man with arthritis and kind eyes. The man who brought me soup when I was sick and helped me sort out my accounts when the numbers blurred in front of my eyes from fatigue. What's wrong, Mavis? There was genuine concern in his voice. I told him everything. About the wedding, about the loan, about being kicked out like a stray dog. With each word, something inside me grew hard and determined. It's awful, Ezra said when I was done. But what can I do? You worked at the bank for 30 years, I said. You know how it works. Can I cancel the payments? All the payments I made for this wedding? There was a pause. Mavis, are you sure? This is a big step. I've never been so sure, I said firmly. He said I wasn't invited. Well, then my money isn't invited either. Ezra sighed. Some transactions could be reversed, especially if they were recent. But credit, that's more complicated. I'm not trying to avoid credit, I clarified. I just want all payments. To the caterer, the catering service, the decorators, canceled. Right now, while the wedding is in full swing. It'll cause chaos, Ezra warned. They could sue. Let them sue, I replied. I don't have anything anyway. The cab pulled up in front of my house. I paid, leaving the driver a generous tip, the last money I had on me. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Ezra said before hanging up. I walked up to my porch, drenched and cold, but a cold fire of determination burned inside me. All these years I'd let Orson use me, manipulate me, feeding off my love and giving me nothing but contempt in return. That ends today. Ezra came in as promised, with his laptop under his arm and a serious expression on his face. We sat down at my kitchen table, covered with an old oilcloth, and he helped me contact the bank. The process was complicated and long. Numerous phone calls, confirmations of identity, explanations of the situation. The bank representative tried to talk me out of it, warned me of the consequences, but I was adamant. These transactions were made under duress, I said. I did not consent to my funds being used in this way. Not exactly the truth, but close enough to it. I was indeed under pressure. The pressure of a mother's love and false hope. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the bank representative said, "Okay, Mrs. Quilp, we'll cancel the transactions, but I must warn you that the payees may challenge this decision." "I understand," I replied. "Thank you for your help." When I hung up the phone, Ezra looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you realize what's going to happen next?" he asked. I nodded. I pictured the restaurant manager coming up to Orson in the middle of the ceremony with the news that the payments had been declined, how the catering service stops serving guests, how the photographer and videographer pack up their equipment and leave. "Yes," I said. "I understand." Ezra gently covered my hand with his. "Don't you think you're acting impulsively? Maybe you should think it through." I shook my head. I thought 36 years, Ezra. Where did I end up? Penniless, with no roof over my head in prospect, and with a son who's so ashamed of me that he can't let me ruin his wedding pictures with my looks. I took an unwrapped gift out of my purse and put it on the table. You know what the funny thing is? I still love him, but sometimes love has to be tough. At that moment, my phone rang. Orson's name popped up on the screen. I showed it to Ezra. "It's already starting," I said. I took a deep breath, gathering my strength, and answered the call. I didn't answer Orson's call. Not the first, not the second, not the 10th. The phone vibrated in my hand every few minutes, but I stared at the screen with my son's name on it and couldn't find the strength to press the green button. What could I say to him? That I was sorry? That would be a lie. I wasn't sorry. Ezra had left about an hour ago, glancing at me worriedly, offering to stay. But I insisted I wanted to be alone. I needed time to process what had happened, to realize what I'd just done and where it could lead. My house had always been cold because of the gaps in the windows and doors, but today the cold seemed to penetrate to the bone. I hadn't been able to afford to turn on the heat for 2 weeks now. All the money had gone to Orson's wedding. I sat in the kitchen, wrapped in an old blanket, staring at the wall with the peeling paint. My phone finally stopped ringing, but it beeped immediately, announcing a new voicemail message. With a daze-like feeling, I pressed the play button and brought the receiver to my ear. "Mom, what the hell? What did you do?" Orson's voice sounded strangled, like he was trying to speak softly, but his emotions were overwhelming him. "Just now the manager came up to us and told us that all payments have been declined. They demand immediate payment or they will terminate service. Call me back now." I deleted the message and moved on to the next one. "It's me again. Do you have any idea what you've done? The catering company is taking the food away. Right in the middle of the reception. Shelby is hysterical. Her parents are furious. If you don't call me back in the next 5 minutes." I didn't listen to what he was going to say. I just deleted that message too. The screen glowed with a notification of 4 more new messages, but I didn't have the energy to listen to them. Not right now. Instead, I made myself some tea, the last bags from the box I'd bought on sale. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. From a strange feeling that felt like fear and release at the same time. My whole life had been spent trying to please others. First my parents, then my husband, then my son. I've always put myself last, thought my needs were insignificant. This is the first time I've ever done something for myself. I stood up for myself. I showed that I am not just an ATM, not just a convenient source of money that can be used without giving anything in return. There was something intoxicating about it, a sense of power I'd never felt before, but at the same time, a deep pain, because I knew it was over. The end of any illusions that Orson and I would ever have a normal relationship. The phone rang again, but it wasn't Orson. It was Ezra. Mavis? His voice sounded agitated. I just got a call from the manager of the Crystal Swan. I was out of breath. What about it? He said he needed to get in touch with the man who was paying for the event. I didn't give him your number, said I'd contact you myself. It looks like it's chaos out there. The caterer refuses to serve, the bar's closed, the musicians are packing up their instruments. I closed my eyes. Did I want this? Ruin my only son's wedding? But then I remembered his words. Your look will ruin all the pictures. I remembered the laughing guests filming my humiliation on their phones. I remembered the cold eyes of Shelby and her parents. What am I going to do? Ezra asked. Nothing, I said. This has nothing to do with you. This is between me and Orson. Mavis, he's your son. And I'm his mother, I said bitterly. But that didn't stop him from making me look like a stray dog. We were quiet for a moment, and I could hear Ezra's heavy breathing on the other end of the line. He understood. Didn't approve, but he understood. I'm worried about you, he finally said. Orson's going to be furious. I know. Maybe you shouldn't be home tonight, I wondered. Orson had never been physically aggressive with me, but he'd always had the same rage in him that his father had. And today I had done something that would trigger that rage like never before. I'll be fine, I said, not quite sure of that. Thank you for your concern. We said goodbye and I was alone in the quiet house again. It was getting dark outside the window, so I kept the lights off, another cost-saving measure. I sat in the semi-darkness with a cup of cold tea and thought about what would happen next. I didn't have to wait long for an answer to that question. About an hour later, I heard the squeal of brakes outside, then the slamming of a car door and heavy footsteps on the porch steps, then the thud of fists on the door. Mom, I know you're in there! Open the damn door! Orson's voice, distorted with rage beyond recognition. I got up slowly and walked stiffly to the door. I didn't open it right away. I asked first, Are you alone? Yes, I am alone. Open up. I turned the key and took a step back as the door swung open. Orson stood in the doorway, still in his wedding suit, but without his jacket and with his tie loose. His face was red with anger, his eyes wild. What the hell did you do? He growled, taking a step inside. He smelled like alcohol. What I should have done a long time ago, I replied, surprised at the calmness in my voice. Stopped letting you use me. Use me? He laughed, but it wasn't funny. I asked you to help pay for the wedding, like any normal mother would do. A normal mother would have been invited to the wedding, I countered, not put out like a beggar. Orson walked past me into the kitchen, his shoulder roughly touching mine. He looked around the meager furnishings with disdain. It wasn't my idea, he said, as if justifying himself. Shelby insisted. Her parents, they're from a different background. They didn't want you to. He hesitated. For me to embarrass you by being here? I finished for him. Don't twist my words, he snapped at me. But yes, they thought you wouldn't fit in, and they were right. Look what you've done. I leaned against the door jamb, suddenly feeling my age and fatigue. What did you do, Orson? I asked quietly. You kicked your own mother out of your wedding. A wedding I paid for, by the way. And then canceled the payments. In the middle of the reception. He slammed his fist on the table. Do you have any idea what I've been through? Shelby was crying. Her father was yelling at me in front of all the guests. The waiters refused to serve. The photographer walked out. The whole wedding was a farce. I'm sorry, I said. And in that moment, I actually felt a pang of regret. Not for what I'd done, but for the fact that it had come to this. But you said it yourself. I wasn't invited, which means neither was my money. Orson looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. He'd never seen the real me, only the convenient version of a mother who always said yes and never demanded anything in return. You have to fix this, he said more calmly. Call the bank, restore the payments. I'll tell everyone it was a technical error. No, I said simply. What do you mean, no? It means I'm not going to fix anything. I borrowed that money against the house, Orson. It's the only thing I have left. And I did it because I thought we were family, that you valued me as more than just a source of money. What does that have to do with it? He exclaimed. I appreciate you, but today was my day, mine and Shelby's, and you ruined it over some petty grudge. A petty grudge. That's how he saw it. 36 years of sacrifice, love, care, and it all came down to a petty grudge. Something snapped inside me, some last thread that bound my heart to guilt. I gave you everything, I said, and my voice sounded strangely detached, like it belonged to someone else. Everything I had and everything I didn't have. I borrowed, deprived myself of what I needed. When you were little, I worked 3 jobs so you could go to a good school. When you got scarlet fever, I stayed up 5 nights at your bedside. When you needed money for college, I sold my mom's ring, the only valuable thing I had left from my past life. I never asked for gratitude, Orson, but I also never thought I'd be kicked out of your wedding as an unwanted guest. He listened to me with growing irritation, his face growing tense. I didn't ask you to sacrifice everything, he shouted. It was your choice. Yes, it was my choice, I agreed. Because I loved you. I still do, even though you don't seem to deserve it. Don't you dare say that. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched. I'm not your ATM, Orson, I said, not backing down. I'm a human being, your mother. But you've never seen that. Something changed in his eyes. Something dark and frightening. In that moment, he looked so much like his father, it took my breath away. You, he hissed, taking another step toward me. You always tried to control me, always trying to make me feel guilty, to tie me to you. And when I finally found a woman who loves me for who I am, you couldn't stand it and decided to ruin everything. It was so far from the truth I couldn't even find an answer. I just stood there and stared at him, my son, turned into a stranger, a hostile man. I wasn't trying to ruin anything, I finally said. I just wanted you to see me as a mother, not just a purse. Shut up! He yelled, and his hand flew up like he was going to hit me. I jerked back instinctively, and the movement seemed to sober him up. He lowered his hand, but his face was contorted with rage. You're going to fix this, he said through gritted teeth. You're going to call the bank right now and reinstate the payments. No, Orson. I will no longer do what you want just because you want me to. Those days are over. He grabbed my shoulders sharply, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. You don't understand, he growled. Shelby's parents are suing me. They're saying I planned the whole thing, that it's a fraud. They could ruin my career, my life. Let me go, I said calmly, even though my heart was racing. Not until you promise to make it right. I won't fix anything, Orson. You made your choice and I made mine. With a furious growl, he pushed me away. I lost my balance and fell, hitting my thigh on the edge of the table. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't make a sound. I just stared up at him, watching the horror of realizing what he'd just done slowly creep into his face. Mom, he began, taking a step toward me. Go away, I said, struggling to get to my feet. My hip throbbed with pain, but I didn't let him see how much it hurt. Get out of my house. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something, to help me, to apologize. But the moment passed, and his face hardened again. You'll regret this, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that sent chills down my spine. I swear you'll regret it. With those words, he turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard that the old picture frame fell off the wall and shattered. I heard him start the car and drive away, the wheels squealing on the wet pavement. I slowly lowered myself into the chair, feeling my knees shake. Only now, as the adrenaline began to subside, did I realize how scared I'd been. I pressed my hand to my side, where the bruise was growing, and felt tears streaming down my face. But those tears weren't just from pain or fear. There was a strange bitterness of relief in them, as if something heavy that I'd been carrying around for years had finally been released. Illusions shattered, masks ripped off. I saw my son for who he really was. And he saw me, not the convenient, always compliant mother, but the person who could say no. His last words echoed in my head. "You're going to regret this." Maybe. But in that moment, sitting in the cold house I might soon lose with a nagging ache in my side and a broken heart, I knew one thing. I didn't regret what I'd done today. For the first time in years, I stood up for myself. And even though the price would be high, it was worth it. After Orson left, I spent a sleepless night. The pain in my hip kept me awake, but even more agonizing was the mental pain. My thoughts spun in a vicious circle. Had I done the right thing? Had I gone too far? Had I become as cruel as my son? By morning I had a fever, and I couldn't get up for work. I called the forewoman, Clara Donovan, a woman with a face like a baked apple and a voice coarsened from 20 years of shouting over the noise of the packing machines. "Third time in a month, Quilp," she grumbled. "You don't have sick leave anymore." "I know, Clara." My voice sounded weak, even to myself. "But I really can't today. I have a fever and personal problems." "Everyone has personal problems," she cut me off. "But the rest of us somehow find the strength to come to work. For the last time, one more pass and you don't have to come back." I hung up the phone and struggled to the bathroom. The bruise on my thigh bloomed all shades of purple and yellow, and there was a bump the size of a hen's egg where I'd hit the edge of the table. A hot bath would have helped, but hot water in the house was a luxury I couldn't afford. The next few days passed in a half-awake state. My fever was up and down, and I swallowed cheap aspirin and tried to lie down. Ezra came by twice, bringing soup and bread and helping me change my bed, but I barely remembered his visits. On the fourth day I felt better, and I was finally able to get Clara on the phone. "Quilp?" She sounded surprised. "Why are you calling?" "To find out what shift I'm on today," I answered, already realizing from her tone that something was wrong. "None," she cut me off. "I told you, one more pass and you don't have to come back. We've already hired a new girl to take your place. She's 16 years old, her arms are intact, her back doesn't hurt, and she's working for two." "But Clara," I began, "I've worked for you for 15 years. So what? You think that gives you the right to skip work? This is a factory, not an almshouse. Pick up your workbook when you can come back." She hung up and I sat there with the phone in my hand staring into the void. 15 years of my life, and it all ended just like that, with one phone call. But the strange thing was, I felt almost no grief, just fatigue and a kind of dullness. A week after the wedding fiasco, I could walk almost without pain, though the bruise was still visible. The letter carrier brought a letter, an official notice from the bank. I knew what was in it before I opened the envelope. An eviction notice. I hadn't been making payments on the loan I'd taken out for Orson's wedding, and now the bank was taking my house. It was strange to read that strict legal language defining the end of the life I knew. In the event of default under the loan agreement, pursuant to paragraph 7,3, foreclosure of the collateral, vacating the premises within 30 calendar days. 30 days. 4 weeks to pack up, find a new place to live, start from scratch. At 68 years old, with no job, no savings, a broken heart, and betrayal by the only person close to me. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. Then I sat on the porch and watched the neighborhood kids playing outside. They laughed and shouted as they raced a tattered ball, their mothers shouting over the fences. The ordinary life that would go on when I was no longer here. Ezra found me like this, sitting on the porch with a letter in his hands, an absent look in his eyes. He crouched next to me, his knees crunching. "Bad news?" he asked, nodding at the envelope. "The bank is foreclosing on the house," I answered, surprised at my own calm. "I have 30 days to move out." Ezra was silent for a long time, looking at the kids playing outside, then at his hands, old with swollen veins and age spots. "Move in with me," he said at last. "Just temporarily, until you get back on your feet." I looked at him. Ezra Pimlico, 72, widower, former bank clerk, my neighbor for almost 20 years. We'd never been close, just neighbors who sometimes helped each other out. But there was something in his eyes now that made my heart ache. I can't, Ezra. It's too much. Nonsense. He waved his hand. I've got a 3-room house, just me. Ever since Martha died, I've lived like a museum. It would be nice to have someone to break the silence. Martha, his wife, died of cancer 5 years ago. I remembered her, a small, lively woman with an infectious laugh. I remembered how Ezra had cared for her in her last months, how he'd become quiet and withdrawn after the funeral. I'll think about it, I said, even though I knew I had no other options. He nodded, not insisting. I heard the news, he said after a pause. About your son. My heart skipped a beat. What news? Shelby had left him, right after the whole wedding thing, went back to her parents, and they said they're suing him for fraud. I stared at Ezra in a daze. How do you know that? Baltimore's a small town, Mavis, especially when it comes to scandals in good families. My cousin works at the law firm that represents Shelby's parents. They claim Orson knew about the canceled payments, that it was premeditated. They're seeking damages and emotional distress. That's a lot of money, as far as I'm concerned. I closed my eyes. Orson, of course, didn't know about any of this. It was entirely my initiative. But some part of me, a dark, evil part I'd never recognized before, felt satisfied. He deserved it. Deserved to feel what it was like to be betrayed, to have your world shattered. He didn't know, I said quietly. I did it alone. Ezra nodded. That's what I thought. But no one seemed to believe him, including Shelby. Shelby, the arrogant, cold girl who saw my son as a stepping stone to a better life. She dumped him at his first trial without even giving him a chance to explain himself. Part of me gloated that Orson would finally see her true colors. But the other part, the mother who will always love her child no matter what, was rooting for him. What's wrong with him now? I asked. Ezra shrugged. I don't know. But from the looks of things, he's not doing well. A scandal like this could really hurt his career. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink, coloring the sky orange and pink. The children one by one went home, the street emptied. It's that special time of the evening when the whole world seems to stand still for a moment, catching its breath. Should I call him? I asked, not addressing anyone in particular. That's up to you, Ezra said. But if you do, be prepared for the possibility that he might not be at his best. I nodded. We sat next to each other for a while longer, and then Ezra left, reminding me of his offer. I was left alone, with the eviction letter and heavy thoughts. That night I decided to call Orson. The phone didn't answer for a long time, and I was about to hang up when I heard his voice, husky, as if from sleep or a hangover. Mom? One word, but there was so much in it. Surprise, bitterness, despair, and not a shred of remorse. Hi, Orson, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. How are you? He laughed, a harsh, unpleasant laugh. How am I? Really? You ruined my life, and now you're asking how I am? I took a deep breath. I'd expected this, but still, his words hurt. I heard you were in trouble. I wanted to know. Trouble? He laughed again, but it quickly turned into a sob. Shelby dumped me. Her parents are suing. I've been suspended from my job while they investigate. Everything's falling apart, all because of you. I'm sorry, Orson, I really am. But I didn't ask you to kick me out of the wedding. You're doing that again? He was practically yelling. Is that why you called? To remind me what a terrible son I am? No, I answered quietly. I called because I was worried. There was a pause. I could hear his heavy breathing. Listen, he said finally, and his voice changed, softer, almost pleading. You can fix this. Just call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake, that you didn't cancel the payments. What? I couldn't believe my ears. Or better yet, tell them you planned the whole thing, that I didn't know what you were up to. Write a statement saying you acted alone without my knowledge. He wanted me to take the blame, to save him again, like I've done all my life. Even now, after everything that's happened, he wasn't thinking about me, only himself. You want me to take the blame? I asked slowly. It's true, isn't it? You really did set this whole thing up without my knowledge. Yes, I did. After you publicly humiliated me. Oh, come on, Mom. He raised his voice again. You showed up uninvited in that old rag, embarrassing me in front of everyone. What was I supposed to do? It was as if I'd been hit under the breath. Old rags, my only decent dress that I was saving for special occasions. His words hurt worse than the bruise on my thigh. I came because I'm your mother, I said, trying hard not to let my voice shake. And because I paid for this wedding with money I didn't have. Money that I'm now losing my home for. What? He sounded worried for the first time. What house? The bank is foreclosing on my house, Orson. I took out a loan against it to pay for your wedding. A loan I can't pay back now. I have 30 days to move out. Silence. Long, hard silence. I'm sorry, he finally said, but there was no real regret in his voice. But this just proves that you have to fix the situation. Call the bank, restore your payments, then you can pay off the loan. I closed my eyes. He still didn't understand, or didn't want to understand. I can't, Orson. The money's gone. And even if it was, I wouldn't do it. I lost my job because I couldn't walk after you pushed me. I'm losing my house. I have nothing left. It's not my fault, he shouted. You started all this. No, Orson. It started long before we were married. It started when you decided you could use me without giving me anything in return. Not even basic respect. What do you want from me? His voice sounded tired and irritated. You want me on my knees to apologize? All right. I'm sorry. Happy? Now how about you finally help me deal with this nightmare? It wasn't a real apology. It was another manipulation, another attempt to get what he wanted. And suddenly I realized I was tired. Tired of this one-gate game, of endless giving without a hint of reciprocation. No, I said, and my voice was harder than I'd expected. You said I wasn't invited into your life, and that's the way it's going to be. You, he choked with indignation. You're abandoning me? Now that I'm in trouble? No, Orson, you abandoned me. Years ago. I'm just finally admitting it. You're gonna regret it, he went back to yelling. I swear you'll come crawling back to me on your knees when you're on the street penniless. As I listened to him shout, a strange calm filled me. It was as if the veil had fallen from my eyes, and I finally saw the truth. My son, whom I loved more than life, had never loved me as much. For him, I had always been just a means to an end, a convenient source of money and support. And when I was no longer useful, he didn't hesitate to discard me. Goodbye, Orson, I said, and pressed the disconnect button, cutting off his stream of threats and accusations. I sat in the dark with the phone in my hand, but I felt no grief or regret. Only a strange lightness, as if I'd dropped a heavy weight I'd been dragging around all my life. My son was lost to me. No, not today, but years ago. I just refused to see it for too long. It was raining outside my window, a soft fall rain that washed the dust off the leaves and freshened the air. I opened the window and put my face up to the cool drops. Tomorrow I would go to Ezra and accept his offer. And then I'll start thinking about what to do next. At 68, life doesn't end, even if it feels like all is lost. It's just a new chapter. A chapter without Orson. 2 months flew by like one long gray day. I'd moved out of my house, where I'd lived for almost 20 years, into a tiny room in the attic of an old house in the cheapest neighborhood in Baltimore. The room was so small that a bed, a table, and a single chair took up almost all of the space. The ceiling sloped toward the wall, and I was constantly hitting my head when I got up at night. It was freezing in the winter, and in the summer it would probably be unbearably hot. But it was all I could afford on my minimum pension, $583 a month, 300 of which went to rent. Ezra had offered to live with him, but I'd declined. Not out of pride was a luxury I hadn't been able to afford in a long time. I just didn't want to be a burden. It was enough that he'd help me move, hauling the few things I'd decided to take with me. Clothes, a few books, a photo album of Orson's childhood pictures that I kept, though I didn't know why. I found a job cleaning at a motel on the edge of town 3 days a week, 9 to 3. It didn't pay much, but it was something. The workload was hard for my age and my aching hip, which had been aching every time the weather changed since Orson had pushed me. But I tried not to complain. After all, a lot of people had it worse. Every morning I woke up in the dark, got ready, and walked to the bus stop. Half an hour on a rattling bus to the motel, 6 hours on my feet with a rag and a vacuum cleaner, then the bus home again. On my free days, I went to the library. It was warm, and you could read newspapers for free. It was in the library, flipping through the local newspaper, that I came across a small article that took my breath away. Construction company Riverside has declared bankruptcy after a series of scandals and lawsuits. It was the company where Orson worked. The article mentioned that one of the company's managers was involved in a wedding scandal when payments for an expensive celebration were canceled at the last minute, leading to a lawsuit with the bride's family. Orson's name wasn't mentioned, but I knew it was about him. My heart clenched no matter what. No matter how much my son hurt me, he was still my child, and the thought of him suffering hurt. I reminded myself, though, that I wasn't the source of these problems. He had made his own choices when he decided his mother wasn't good enough for his new life. A week later, coming home from work in the late afternoon, I had to stay late because one of the rooms was particularly dirty. I ran into Ezra. He was waiting for me on the street corner where I usually turned toward my house. "Mavis," he said, and his face was unaccustomedly serious. "I have to warn you. Your son is looking for you." I froze. "Orson? How do you know?" "He came to see me. He didn't look, not so good. He asked me where you lived. I didn't say, but he was persistent. I'm afraid he might track you down." I nodded slowly, digesting the information. "Thanks for the warning." "Mavis." Ezra put his hand on my shoulder. He was drunk and very angry. "Maybe you should go away for a while. I have a cousin in Annapolis who might be able to—" "No," I interrupted him. "I'm not running from my own son. If he wants to find me, let him find me." But inwardly, I wasn't so sure. What if Orson showed up in a rage? What if he used force again, but this time he didn't stop at the push? I didn't sleep well that night, flinching at every rustle outside my window. In the morning, I went to work as usual, but all day I couldn't get rid of the feeling of anxiety. It was not in vain. When I returned in the evening, Orson was standing in front of my door. Even from behind, I recognized his slouching figure, but when he turned around, I almost shrieked. In 2 months, he'd changed beyond recognition. He was thin, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled and stale, his stubble unkempt. He smelled of booze. "Mom," he said, and his voice was hoarse as if he'd been screaming or crying for a long time. "I finally found you." I stood there not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to hug him, to comfort him, like when he'd fallen and smashed his knees as a child. The other part remembered his words, his actions, the bruise on my thigh that still whined sometimes at night. "What are you doing here, Orson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you." He took a step toward me and I stepped back. He noticed it and grinned bitterly. "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you." I didn't answer, just opened the door of my room and walked in, leaving it open. He followed me in, looking around with poorly concealed shock. "Do you live here?" he asked, and there was something akin to shame in his voice. "Yes," I answered, sitting down on the only chair. He had to sit on the bed. There was no other place. "What did you want?" He was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. Then he looked up at me, his eyes red with burst capillaries. "I've lost everything," he said quietly. "My job, my house, my car. I have nothing left." I waited for the rest of the story, even though I already knew where it was going. "Shelby's parents won the lawsuit. I owe them $30,000 for the wedding and emotional distress. I don't have that kind of money. I'm forced to declare personal bankruptcy." He spoke in a monotone, emotionless, as if he were reading off a shopping list. But his hands, clutching his knees, were trembling. "I'm sorry, Orson," I said, and I really was. No mother wants to see her child in that condition, no matter how he treated her. "Sorry?" Suddenly his tone changed, harsh. "You're the one who set this whole thing up. You ruined my life." And that was the real reason for his visit. Not remorse, not a desire for reconciliation. Accusations. The same accusations. "No, Orson," I said firmly. "You ruined your own life when you thought you could treat people like things. When you decided you could kick your own mother out of your wedding after she'd paid her last dime." He jumped up, his face contorted with anger. I didn't ask you to pay. You offered. Yes, I did, I nodded. Because I thought it would bring us closer together. Because I hoped you'd finally see how much I loved you. Love you? He laughed an evil, ugly laugh. If you loved me, you wouldn't be making this circus. And if you loved me, you wouldn't have kicked me out like a stray dog. We stared at each other across the tiny space of the room, and there was a gulf between us the width of 36 years of misunderstanding. I need money, he finally said, changing tactics. His voice was softer, more pleading. Just a little. Just to hold me over until I find a new job. I'll give it to you, I promise. I looked at him and saw not my son, but his father. The same intonation, the same manipulation, the same promises that would never be kept. History was repeating itself like a nightmare. I don't have any money, Orson, I said. I live on my pension and work 3 days a week as a janitor, barely enough for food and a roof over my head. You could take out a loan, he insisted, or borrow from someone. This old man, your neighbor, he obviously has a thing for you. I shook my head, feeling something inside of me snap. No, Orson, I won't do it anymore. I won't sacrifice myself, my future, my dignity for a man who only sees me as a purse. You, he choked with indignation. You refuse to help your own son? I refuse to continue a toxic relationship that is destroying us both. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he did. Maybe he was seeing me for the first time, not as a convenient mom who was always there to help, but as a person with her own boundaries and feelings. Okay, he finally said, and his face hardened. I get it. You chose your pride over your own son. That's fine. But when things get worse, don't come to me. With those words, he headed for the door. I didn't try to stop him. Only when his hand rested on the doorknob did I speak. Orson. He turned around. I wanted to tell him that I still loved him, that I always would, that the door was open to him if he ever wanted a real, healthy relationship. But the words stuck in my throat because I knew he wasn't ready to hear them, and he probably never would be. Take care of yourself, was all I said. He snorted and walked out, slamming the door loudly. I sat still, listening to his footsteps on the creaky stairs. When the sound died down, I covered my face with my hands and finally let myself cry. Not for what had been lost today. Today I hadn't lost anything I hadn't lost long ago. I cried for what could have been, for relationships that never worked out, for a love that was always one-sided. A week later, I was walking home from work when I saw Ezra waiting for me on the same corner. But this time his face wasn't frowning. On the contrary, he was smiling. Mavis, he called out to me. I have news. We walked into a small coffee shop, a rare luxury for me, but Ezra insisted. As we sat down at a table with 2 cups of hot coffee, he pulled an envelope out of his jacket pocket and placed it in front of me. What's this? I asked. Open it. His eyes glistened like a child with a surprise. I opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a wad of bills, not huge, but impressive for someone in my position. Ezra, I can't. Yes, you can, he interrupted me. I've been saving for you ever since I found out about your situation. Little by little every month. This isn't charity, Mavis. It's, an investment. An investment? I repeated incomprehensibly. He inhaled deeply, as if about to dive into cold water. I found a place. A small trailer on the outskirts of town near the lake. Quiet neighborhood. Good neighbors. The owner is willing to sell it for that money plus what I still have. I stared at him, not understanding where he was going with this. I was thinking, Ezra continued, and his cheeks flushed slightly, that we could live there, together, as neighbors, or whatever you want to call it. I remained stunned, silent. Ezra seemed to take that as a rejection because he added hastily, Sure, if you don't want to, I understand. I just thought it might be easier for 2 retirees to do it together than alone. And you said you always dreamed of a little house. Ezra, I put my hand over his. This is the most wonderful offer I've ever gotten. His face brightened, the wrinkles around his eyes smoothed out. It is? It's true, but I have to know. Are you sure? I'm not the easiest person to get along with. I have a complicated past, a troubled son, and I'm not getting any younger or healthier. Ezra laughed, a light, hearty laugh I hadn't heard since his Martha died. Mavis, I'm 72 years old. I have arthritis, a prostate the size of a grapefruit, and I snore so much the neighbors complain. Neither of us is perfect. But maybe together we can carry our imperfections more easily. I looked into his kind eyes, saw the wrinkles in his face, the marks of a lifetime of joys and sorrows, and felt something warm spill into my chest. Not passion, not romantic love, but something calmer and perhaps more lasting. Friendship, understanding, mutual respect. Yes, I said. I think it will be. A month later, we moved in. The trailer was tiny but cozy. 2 closet-sized bedrooms, a cramped kitchenette, a small living room with a worn couch. But most importantly, it was ours. And there was a lake outside the window that shimmered all shades of gold and purple at sunset. We quickly set up housekeeping. Ezra was a good cook. I was a good hostess. We shared expenses, worries, and occasional joys. There were no violent passions or great revelations, just the quiet, peaceful life of 2 people who had been alone for too long. One evening, about 2 months after the move, the mailman brought a letter. A formal envelope with a law firm logo. From or about a son. I knew it right away, though there was no sender's name. I sat by the window looking out at the sunset and held the unopened envelope in my hands. What was in it? More accusations, demands, threats, or perhaps an apology, a belated repentance. Ezra came out of his room, saw me with the letter, and nodded understandingly. From him, he asked. I shrugged. Most likely, or about him. Are you going to read it? I stared at the envelope for a long time, at my name printed in cold black letters. Then I slowly tore it in half, and then again and again and again, until I had no more shreds in my hands. No, I said. I won't. Ezra came over and put his hand on my shoulder. Are you sure? Yes, I answered, looking out at the sunset. Some wounds never heal, but you can learn to move on by carrying them with you. I tossed the scraps of the letter into the trash and went back to the window. The sun had almost disappeared over the horizon, leaving farewell flashes of light in the sky. The day was ending, but tomorrow a new one would begin, and maybe it would be better than the last.